Hi, I'm Doug. I'm your tech support representative for Atlantic British, and in this video we're going to touch base on the transmission maintenance kit that we will be promoting on our maintenance and service program. Now this would be for the 4-speed transmission, the automatic transmission, in the Discovery 1, Discovery 2, late classics, and the P38. Transmission is a 4-speed automatic, which is the 4HP24, and in this kit you'll basically have everything you need to do a transmission service. You'll be getting a new gasket for the pan, 2 new O-rings, the filter itself, new bolts and holding shoulders for the pan, for replacing the pan, and 6 quarts of ATF3, which would work on basically all that transmission range across all the vehicles that I've mentioned. What we're going to do then is we're now going to show you how to do your own transmission service on this vehicle. Okay, so here we are under our 97 Defender, and we're going to show you how to do a transmission fluid service and filter. Now in the case of the 97 Defenders and in the classic Range Rovers, they put a brace directly underneath the pan. So we're going to need to move this before we can drop the pan on this, which is really nothing more than 4 bolts on both sides of the plate. The plate is going to be a reasonably tight fit. What we normally do is we'll take a 2x4 or a pry bar and we'll work it forward far enough so that we can have access to the pan. Okay, so one thing I want to note before you drive this Crossmember fully forward, right up here you have your tube with your dipstick for the transmission in the front of the pan, and that's going to need to be removed. So we're just going to slide our catch pan underneath. Now I'm using an 1¼ inch, actually an 1 3/16 or a 31 millimeter will fit this, but 1 3/16 is much easier to find. Simply break it loose. You may need to tap on that nut with a small hammer a few times just to break the initial buildup that develops around the outside. Now this service is going to be on the 4-speed HP22 that they used in the Classic, in the Defender, 97 Defender, Discovery 2 and Discovery 1. Now they also used a 4HP24, which you'd usually find behind a 4.6. Same kit, same transmission, same procedure, so no difference. You don't have to worry which transmission you have in there. Both, it'll work on both. So what we'll do first, what we have is 4 bolts on each side, 17 millimeter or 11/16, so you can fit on both. We've already loosened and removed most of the nuts on here, which is just a matter of unbolt. Keep track of your washers, because some of the washers are flat spotted on one side, so that when you put the nut in, the washer will clear the frame. As you can see, you have a flat area there, so keep that in mind when you take your hardware off. And essentially what we can do is take the old-fashioned 2x4. A good dead blow hammer will do a better job than a steel head on something like this, because it has more of a driving force. You can place your 2x4 right across your brace. A couple hits on each side, and we're just going to work this forward until we have plenty of room. Now one thing to remember, when you take your top bolts off, you're going to notice this side, in fact both sides, the front top bolt, the nut is actually part of the brace that supports the heat shield. So as you're driving this forward, you just want to make sure you're not crimping or pushing against the heat shield. You don't want to do any damage to it. If you just go a little bit at a time, it moves fairly easy. You don't want to go too far. You want to go too far on either side, because you don't want to pinch the brace between the frame. Alright, what we're going to do now is we're going to drain the pan. If you're working on out in your driveway or whatever, you're going to need a bucket. Probably preferably use like a 5-gallon pail. Start with a clean one. And when you are done, you can take the fluid to most car dealerships and automotive centers where they'll dispose of it properly. Do not be dumping this down your sewer drain or down the toilet. That's not a good idea. Take this to a center that will actually take the fluid and properly dispose of it. So you basically got a 17 millimeter nut in the bottom of the pan. Crack it loose. Initially, you're probably going to drop about 4 to 5 quarts out of this. You can see on this one the fluid looks in pretty good shape, and yours may come out black, which is a good indication that it was time to change it. And this will take a few minutes to drain out, and then we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so we've drained the majority of the fluid out of the pan. You're going to see right now, even now we're getting a small flow. You could leave this here for probably an hour, and this will still do this, and this is fluid that's slowly siphoning out of the valve body inside. But at this point, it's safe to say you can put the plug back in so that we can now take off our dipstick tube up front so that we can continue to move that cross member up front, which will give us access to the pan. At this point, we're going to tighten this up. Just a good snug fit. And now we'll move up front to our tube. And we shouldn't get too much dripping out of here. And again, 1¼ inch seems to work pretty well. I think 1 3/16 fits a little bit better. Once you break the nut loose, that'll just come forward. Okay, so we're clear there. Now we're going to continue moving that cross member forward so we can get that out of our way so we can start dropping the pan. So, a little bit at a time. You can go upwards a little bit, which will give you even more clearance. And we still got a little bit to go. If you need to pivot it, you can lightly pry on it. I wouldn't suggest prying heavily on the pan. There we go. You got a little flexibility with the exhaust system, so don't worry about it if it's moving it a little bit. And I think we're forward enough. We can take the 6 bolts out that we have retaining the pan in place. Now they're 10mm heads. And what I normally suggest is, because you have a steel bolt in an aluminum housing, you're going to notice that they're going to feel pretty tight when they want to come out. You take a steel punch, now not brass, but steel. Brass is going to absorb the shock, and the shock factor is what you want. And just place it right up against the head of the bolt. A small, medium-sized ball peen. Just give it a couple good wraps. And what that does is sort of break the seal that's developed between the bolt and the aluminum housing. Now I like to use a deep swivel 10mm because then I can kind of get around some of the angles that I need to. And place that on top, and then just a little snap, and out it comes. So we're going to take all 6 off. You're going to hold on to the bolts because we're going to reuse the bolts, but we are going to replace the caps that hold the pan in place. And we'll show you in a minute. We have 6 aluminum blocks. There's 4 corners and then 2 straights, 1 for each side in the middle. You get so much buildup in the blocks that you may need even the bolt to be out of the transmission, but you'll actually still be unthreading through the block. Alright, so we found in this case with a 97D Defender that we can't quite move the cross member up far enough to clear the threaded nipple that supports the dipstick tube. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to at least disconnect one side of the front drive shaft so that we can slide it up and give us a little more clearance. We only need about a ½ inch. So what we're going to do before we even unbolt it, we're going to make a little dimple mark. You can use a splat of paint or whatever and make a mark on both the drive shaft hub and the flange on the axle. This way when you reinstall that, you put it back in the same position that you took it off, and that reduces any chance of any vibration developing because of an imbalance between the shaft and the differential. So what we've originally done, we've already taken the bolts out, and what I want to do is show you a tool that we carry. This is the DA1065. This is a 9/16 12 point. This is in 3/8 drive. We also have a version in 1/2 inch drive should you need more torque, but this is contoured to fit around that U-joint so that you can get a good shot at that upper that bolt. And this makes taking that front drive shaft considerably easier. This is a must-have tool if you're doing drive shafts on any of these older Land Rovers. So we have the one bolt left in place. We'll take that off. And as I say, we've basically already unbolted them. Now these use the self-locking aircraft style nuts, which generally are not recommended to reuse. So if you have access to these locally, you should replace these before you put the drive shaft back on. And we're just going to push the drive shaft up in place. And we're going to tap that cross member forward while we're holding the pan, because this is going to drop. Okay, so the pan is out. Okay, so essentially at this stage of the game, now that we have the cross member moved and the pan down, the process is the same whether you have a P38, D1, D2, or Classic. Again, this is the HP22. HP24 will have the same design. Here's your filter right at the bottom of the valve body, and you've got 3 bolts with a T25 Torx head driver. And I like to use 1/4 inch on these, mostly for when you're tightening, because you really don't need to torque these up. Now, try to stay out from directly underneath the filter. When you remove it from the valve body, you are going to get some fluid drain, so you don't want to be directly underneath it. Being these bolts go internal in the transmission, try not to lay them on any dirt or contaminated areas. Preferably on a clean rag would be best, so you're not introducing any dirt or chunks into the system when you reinstall your new filter and put your pan back in place. Now you see the extra drain on it. Now this gives you an idea what can develop inside of a transmission. This is a film that's on top. You can see where I rub my finger on there what the color of that is. Now this is basically just worn material that wears off the clutches over a period of time, which does build up inside the filter, which is why this is a recommended procedure. You definitely do want to do this during the recommended intervals. Makes a huge difference as to the life of your transmission. So we'll take the pickup snorkel out of there, because we are going to reuse this. This filter gets replaced, and in the kit you'll also have the new O-ring that goes onto this nipple that the pickup tube goes on, and then you'll also have the O-ring, the replacement O-ring for the other side of the filter, and all this comes in your kit. So we're going to take our replacement O-ring that comes with the kit. We're going to insert that on the pickup tube nipple. Work the finger back and forth. Now you'll see little drops of clean fluid on the bottom of the valve body. You can always dab your finger in there and then rub a little bit of transmission fluid on the O-ring. That'll make the installation a little bit easier. Things will slide in much quicker. Same thing with the O-ring for the back side of the filter. This one you have to stretch out a little bit and roll into place to get it on. Roll your finger around the outside of the O-ring so that you've got some lube on there. That also lessens the chance of that O-ring coming out of place as you're installing it. And I'll take the pickup tube and the clean rag. I'll wipe some of that excess dirt off of there and install it on the new filter. Work it back and forth and you'll feel the O-ring work its way in. There we go. It'll pop in. Again, that's why you want to lube it up. If you try to put that in dry, there's still a chance the O-ring would unfold and not seat properly unless you end up with a leak. So, you go back to your 3 bolts that you removed earlier. And you'll see that one is longer than the rest, and the long one is the one that's going to go into your pickup tube. The other 2 are your retainer bolts from the back. So we'll slide that one in place. Take our ratchet off the extension and we'll use the driver as a starter tool. Now, we'll line that up with a hole and slide that up in place. And then same thing what we did earlier as far as seating this. You want to seat the O-ring that's on the other side or the back side of the filter. We'll run this bolt in until it's just snug, and then that'll hold things up in place for us while we work the O-ring in. Start the other 2 bolts. Okay, that'll hold itself up in place while we run them in. Again, these don't have to be over torqued. They don't need to be super tight. Initially, you're just going to run them in until they feel like they're just seated. You feel a little resistance while you're turning them. And then once we seat all 3, we'll go around once and just give them about 1/8 of a turn so that we know we're torqued in place right. Alright, actually we'll go about 1/4 turn to 1/2. That feels pretty good. Nice and snug. And that's it. Your filter's in place. Now the pan, we're going to drain the rest of the pan. There's still some fluid in there. We'll seat the gasket in. Probably want to give the pan, let's give that a few minutes to drain out properly. We'll wipe the rest of it out with a clean rag. We'll do the upper edge of the pan itself, and then we'll seat the gasket on. Alright, so we've let the pan drain. Took a clean rag, we wiped out the inside, we got the residue out of that. We take the new gasket, which you can see is grooved to fit right around this lip, all the way around the top of the pan. And just set it in place and give it a little tap all the way down to seat it. We have our filter in place, we have our pickup tube, that's all locked down. Now again, you saw when we were taking the pan down, we have a clearance problem right here. So we're going to try to be very careful about laying this back up in place without doing damage to anything else. And we're probably going to have to do a little prying to get it past that, to get this little nipple here just past this cross member. And that we should be able to do just by using our trusty bar. Now, you got to be careful, which I've run into that a number of times when you set this up in place. This gasket really doesn't stay well on the pan, so you're going to have to fool with it a little bit. Keep double and triple checking, make sure that that gasket is on all the way around. Okay, so we've got the pan up in place. We've made sure our gasket is seated all the way around. Again, it is a tight fit. Now, if you remember when we took these blocks off, your retainers, that the bolts remained inside, and mostly because you get corrosion buildup around the middle of this bolt that's exposed inside the blocks. Essentially, they come out like that. You can put these in a vise or set them on a block or whatever. You can tap the bolt down through with a small hammer and a punch, and then you'll see like a buildup right around the middle of the bolt. You just take a wire brush or piece of crocus cloth or whatever, clean that off so that when you reinstall it, your bolts will fit in the new blocks very easily. All 6 bolts are the same length, so you don't have to worry about their positioning. And what we're going to do is we're going to set bolts into 2 straight blocks which go in the middle of the pan. We're going to use these to basically hold the pan up in place. Okay, so those will hold the pan in suspension. And again, I'm going to check one more time to make sure that gasket is fully wrapped around that pan. Alright, so that's in place, that's suspended. You're just simply going to put your remaining 4 bolts in the corner blocks, screw those up in the same way, and then we'll go around and just torque them in so they're good and snug. Okay, now we get the pan up in place and we got the 6 bolts snug. Now we start from the middle. You can start from either side, doesn't matter, but if you go to the middle, then you're just going to get it just nice and snug. You should feel the bolt seat, and without a lot of effort you should feel at one point it stops. Now I have seen a number of these after you've done this service and you get a few hundred miles on them. These gaskets can compress a little bit, so you get back underneath after a couple of 100 miles and then just double check if you see any seeping through the gasket. Just basically go around and snug the bolts up again. You'll probably find they'll go maybe about a quarter of a turn and snug in. Just the nature of the beast, unfortunately. But you're kind of working an outward pattern. Always start in the middle and work your way outside, going back and forth and side to side. And this way you know you get a good even seal. You're not over torquing one area or one corner. Okay, and that's that. Pan's up in place. So what we're going to do next is put the front drive shaft. Well, we're going to knock this backwards, and then we're going to put the front drive shaft on, get the bolts lined up for the cross member, put your dipstick tube back on, and then we'll proceed with the refill. Alright, so we're done underneath. Our pan's in place, gasket is set, got all the bolts back in place, cross member and the front drive shaft all bolted up. So now we're ready to add our fluid. The fluid that comes in our kit, the LiquiMoly ATF3, is equivalent to any high grade ATF3 or Dexron 3. Nice thing about it is built into the bottles. You essentially have an installation tube. Place finger over, find your dipstick hole, and insert. And we'll give a little squeeze to speed things up a little bit. Essentially we're going to start off with probably about 3 quarts, refill the pan. We'll start it up, run it through drive, reverse, put it through the low range, and we'll let it warm up a bit, and then once fluid comes up to normal operating temperature, then we'll set our level using our dipstick. Now on the later models, on your Discovery 2, your P38, this transmission no longer uses a dipstick, and there'll be a level hole that's down below on the front side of the case, just above the pan. And we're going to do we'll have another video based on that. I think we've already got 1 quart in there. Alright, so we've got about 3 quarts into that cold. We got enough to fill the pan pretty much. We're going to start this. Let the idle level off, takes about a half a minute. Then what we're going to do is just slowly shift down into reverse, let it sit there about 15 seconds, then neutral, then drive, then all the way down the line, all the way to first gear, and then all the way back up to park. We're going to leave it running, and then from that point we're just going to continue to add fluid and checking it with the dipstick until we hit our proper level. You can already hear, even with just the 3 quarts, we're already engaging into gear. There's neutral. Drive. Second gear. And first. Now we're just going to bring right back up to drive. Neutral. And we should hear it engage into reverse. And park. Alright. Now at this point we're just going to let her warm up to operating temperature. And then bring the level up to where it should be. Nothing yet. We need to add at least a quart. We should end up taking about 6, maybe 6.5 quarts to completely fill. Alright, so we've put in just about 6 3/4 quarts. Our level right now with the vehicle running, the temperature up, is just above the dot. That'll drop down a little bit as the system loses the small amount of air that may be left in there as you run it through drive and reverse. So our level will be just about where it should be. So, there you have it. Now this is an important maintenance to do on your vehicle. A transmission can be a very expensive repair if it should go. You can definitely lengthen its life by doing these regular services. And when you're ready to do so, you can contact any of our knowledgeable salesmen at 1-800-533-2210.